Good evening, and thank you for joining us. My name is Betsy McShane, and I am the state biologist for the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Natural Resources Conservation Service here in New Jersey. And I'd like to welcome you to the first presentation in our Working Lands for Wildlife Webinar Wednesday series. This evening's presentation is being recorded and will be available for future viewing on our YouTube channel. A link to that recording will be provided in the chat. This webinar series is a joint effort between NRCS and several partner organizations that work together to restore wetlands habitat on private lands here in New Jersey. Throughout the series, we will chat with different partner biologists to discuss their work and the particular species that they focus on. Each session will be held on Microsoft Teams beginning at 7 p.m. Presentations will last 30 to 45 minutes with a question and answer session to follow. While we welcome you to join in the conversation during the question and answer, we would appreciate it if you would mute your microphone in the meantime to reduce the background noise. Thank you. To kick off the series, tonight I will give an introduction to New Jersey NRCS, that is the Natural Resources Conservation Service, our conservation programs, the Working Lands for Wildlife Initiative, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program. On February 4th, Ben Lange, our Working Lands partner biologist with Ducks Unlimited, will talk about American black duck ecology and conservation. Next, on February 11th, Katie DiPaolo, the stewardship specialist with New Jersey Audubon, will present on northern bobwhite quail ecology. Then, on February 18th, we'll hear from Mark Virgilio. Mark is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's New Jersey State Coordinator for their Partners for Fish and Wildlife program. Mark will talk to us about bog turtle ecology and our work to conserve their habitat. On February 25th, we'll learn about golden-winged warbler ecology and conservation as presented by Sharon Petzinger. Sharon is a senior zoologist with the New Jersey Fish and Wildlife's Endangered and Non-Game Species Program. Last but not least, Olivia Matisse, our Mid-Atlantic pollinator specialist with the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation, will join us on March 4th to discuss pollinator ecology and conservation. We would like to remind you to register for each of the events in this series. We have provided a link in the Eventbrite website in the chat, which I will do when this meeting is finalized. At the end of this presentation, I'll put that right into the chat, and you can sign up for upcoming Wednesdays. You can also scan this QR code with your phone's camera, and I will also post this at the end of the presentation as well. Make sure to click on each date to register individually for the topics that are of interest to you. And as I mentioned before, my name is Betsy McShane, or Elizabeth McShane, and I'm the state biologist for the Department of Agriculture's Natural Resources Conservation Service here in New Jersey. And you may ask, who is NRCS? And we're an agency of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. We're the lead technical agency of the USDA, and we work with customers to help them reduce erosion, protect wildlife, promote good land use, and to preserve the nation's natural resources. And we have just celebrated our 90th anniversary this past year. NRCS resulted from troubled times, the Dust Bowl days back in the 1930s. Dust storms ravaged the nation's farmland, stripping away millions of tons of topsoil. In 1935, the U.S. was in the middle of the Dust Bowl, a man-made natural disaster. High crop prices and a series of wet years in the 1920s led farmers to plow up native grasslands and plant crops on the usually arid Great Plains. By the 1930s, unrelenting drought and merciless winds hit the area. As crops withered, the land now bare of both crops and native vegetation to hold the soil simply could not withstand the conditions, and the soil simply blew away. The results were devastating. During this time, Hugh Hammond Bennett, the father of soil conservation, led the government's nationwide effort to halt the national menace of unchecked erosion. He recognized that soil was a strategic natural resource, and its loss on private lands harmed not just farmers, but the wider public in the nation. This led to the temporary establishment of the Soil Erosion Service, which was in existence from 1933 to 1935. On March 21st, 1935, when the Soil Erosion Service's temporary funds set to expire soon, Bennett testified before Congress about the need for a permanent national interdisciplinary approach to combating excessive erosion. A prosperous and enduring agriculture depends on an adequate supply of productive land, properly used and so protected from erosion that it will remain permanently productive. Take care of the land and the land will take care of you, is what Hugh Hammond Bennett told Congress. Just over a month later, on April 27th, the president signed the Soil Conservation Act. The act created the Soil Conservation Service at the United States Department of Agriculture, and Hugh Hammond Bennett became its first chief. They began implementing practices to reduce erosion, and these practices are things such as contour farming. Shortly after its founding, the agency expanded its scope beyond soil as the country's lead voluntary conservation agency for private lands. To reflect this expansion, the agency was renamed the Natural Resources Conservation Service in 1994. Since that time, NRCS has kept a commitment to protecting and conserving soil and other natural resources on America's private lands. Similar principles are still used today. This is a grassed waterway, for example. The land is hurting. The water can't soak into the ground, so it runs off the top of the field, taking soil with it. To keep water from taking soil with it when it rains faster than the water can be absorbed, we use things such as grass waterways. Our agency provides our services through technical assistance. We provide technical assistance on topics such as soil, wildlife, engineering, pollinator habitat, wetlands, forestry, grazing, and organic farming. Our agency has many expertises. We have technical specialists on staff who can help, and some of these technical specialists include resource conservationists, soil scientists, engineers, field technicians, biologists such as myself, agronomists, and grazing land specialists. And we work across all the varied landscapes of New Jersey. All the different resources are addressed. And how this works is the trained conservation planner will work with private landowners, will come to your farm and walk the site and discuss with you what your goals are and what some of the conservation needs are. And then we'll make suggestions of how we can work with you to improve the conservation of those resources. And we put these into a conservation plan. And some things to remember when you're working with NRCS. Our technical assistance is all free. That conservation planning and technical assistance from our specialists is used to identify resource concerns, provide alternatives for solving those concerns, and developing a timeline to implement that plan. We also have conservation program application assistance. This is financial assistance that is available through our Farm Bill programs. We'll go over just a little bit about some of the eligibility rules and when we're walking the site with you. And then we'll help you determine what is the best fit for your operation, which program fits your needs the best. And then we can help you process those applications for our programs. Some other things to remember is that landowners can come in and work with our field offices and sign up at any time for technical assistance or program funding. Most of our programs are competitive. There is a ranking process, and that ranking process is typically held during the fall and through the winter. Our field offices right now are in the midst of ranking new applications that we received in October. And actually, this year was extended a bit because of the government shutdown. And we accepted applications for this fiscal year all the way through January 15th. If landowners miss that deadline, it's the perfect time to come in and start working with the conservation planners with the idea of submitting application for next year. The ranking that we use is based on how the objectives of your project meet national, state, and local concerns. And we also do take into consideration things like cost efficiency. There is no minimum size for a property to apply for our programs, and there's no minimum farm income. All of our participation in our programs is voluntary. NRCS is not a regulatory agency. And your plan remains private. It will not be shared with anyone without your consent. When you hear about USDA Farm Bill programs, you may hear a lot of different names and a lot of different acronyms. We have easement programs that will help purchase development rights and restore wetlands. We also have programs where we provide cost assistance to implement more typical conservation practices that are often used on farms. But really, we don't want our landowners to be confused by this alphabet soup of programs and acronyms. NRCS can help you navigate this and guide you to the best suited funding source for your property and your project. I will mention just a couple of our programs that are most often used when we're doing wildlife habitat restoration in New Jersey. The first is our Environmental Quality Incentive Program, otherwise known as EQIP. And this provides assistance to install and maintain conservation practice that sustain food and fiber production while enhancing soil, water, and related natural resources. And it assists producers to make beneficial changes to their production systems. This is our Fix It program. If you have an erosion issue or you have animals and you need to deal with waste storage, or if you want to more efficiently use your irrigation system, EQIP is the program that we can use to help fix some of those issues. We have another program called the Wetlands Reserve Easement Program, and this is a program we can purchase 30-year or permanent easements on land that was once agriculture, was once wetlands, and it was altered for agricultural purposes. And we can purchase easements on those properties and restore those wetlands to the functions and values that were there before the agricultural use. And so these are two of our most typically used programs here in New Jersey that help us restore habitat. In addition to our programs, we've honed in on our working lands and how it can support wildlife habitat through our Working Lands for Wildlife initiative. And so let's talk about how NRCS has partnered to support America's working lands by implementing conservation practices to enhance wildlife habitat. And that's through the Working Lands for Wildlife initiative. So the Working Lands for Wildlife initiative was first formed through a partnership between NRCS and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And the goal was to demonstrate that productive working lands are compatible with the needs of at-risk wildlife species. At the time, and this first was initiated in 2011 and was put into place in 2012 for the first year. Agency technical expertise combined with an initial $33 million of financial assistance was used to combat the decline of 7 specific wildlife species, whose decline can be reversed and will benefit other species with similar habitat needs at the same time. So in this photo, it's the chief of the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service back in 2012, Chief White, and he's with the director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they're announcing this program when it was brand new. And really, it was with the idea that nearly 2/3 of all species federally listed as threatened or endangered exist on private lands. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service does absolutely wonderful work on all of the refuges throughout the country. And NRCS works primarily with private landowners. And in this program, it allowed us to join our efforts together and address the habitat of those species that will cross back and forth between federal land and private land. And since then, many other organizations have joined in on the initiative. This agreement, it was said that this agreement will change the way that we manage at-risk species on private lands. It will provide landowners with a mechanism to keep working lands in production, so keep farming those lands while complying with the Endangered Species Act, and will facilitate restoration of habitat for at-risk species. It also was intended to help farmers, ranchers, and forest landowners rest a little easier, knowing that their operations are protected for the long term, and they're contributing to conserving vital natural resources. So through the Working Lands for Wildlife, landowners can voluntarily participate in an incentive-based effort to restore populations of declining wildlife species. And it provides farmers, ranchers, and forest managers with regulatory certainty that conservation investments they make today help sustain their operations over the long term. And that was something that was established for those initial 7 species. And it was an effort to strengthen and sustain rural economies by restoring and protecting the productive capacity of working lands. So what are those 7 species that were originally established as part of the Working Lands Initiative back in 2012? Well, the species were lesser prairie chicken, New England cottontail, southwestern willow flycatcher, greater sage grouse, gopher tortoise, bog turtle, and golden winged warbler. We targeted species whose decline can be reversed and will benefit other species with similar habitat needs. So the goal was to focus on species that we could increase their habitat with the goal of making sure that they either, if they're already listed, that their populations become secure, or if they're one of these species that were not yet listed, that we could do enough habitat restoration that it wasn't needed to list the species. So you can see that these species are spread throughout the country and their habitat needs definitely cross state boundaries. And there was also the idea that we would be picking umbrella species so that if we are restoring habitat for these species, there's a whole suite of other wildlife species that use that same habitat and would benefit from the projects as well. And here's a map of those original 7 species and where they're located and the states that they're in. And you'll see that New Jersey is a small state, but we actually had 2 of the 7 species had habitat, and their range was within New Jersey. So the 2 that New Jersey was listed to participate on the Working Lands for Wildlife initial 7 species were bog turtle and golden winged warbler. And here's a map of where that golden winged warbler ranges. So you can see it's an Appalachian species, but there are small sections of its habitat range that overlap with New Jersey. And the most common explanations point to the loss and degradation of early successional habitat for the risk for golden-winged warbler. Golden-winged warblers and many other species depend on shrubby, idle vegetated areas like forest clear-cuts, alder swamps, utility right-of-ways, and other similar habitats for breeding. Direct losses from development, reforestation of farmland that has been abandoned, fire suppression, and changes in agriculture and forestry practices have led to its decline. It's a neotropical migrant, and it's found from Georgia to New York, in Pennsylvania and West Virginia, and it was declining across its range. Most of it was due to loss of early successional habitat, and just 2% in New Jersey. It was a federally petitioned species at the time, and it was known to occur at elevations over 500 feet from sea level. The habitat that is good for golden-winged warbler is also good for grouse, turkey, woodcock. And the major concerns to some of this habitat is things like deer and invasive species. So here's a little bit of a closer look of the area that was focused on for golden-winged warbler habitat restoration projects. We have the conservation boundary, so pretty much that's an eligibility area, but then we had the focal areas within that. And here's a look at some of the projects that were implemented, the type of work that was done. And it was mostly forestry work, working with landowners that had forestry forest stewardship plans approved by the state that would be implemented on their private lands. And it was looking to restore some of that young forest or early successional habitat, which would diversify the species composition on the site. And we'll be hearing in one of our future webinars on from Sharon Petzinger, and she'll go much more in depth in the habitat needs of golden warbler and the work that we did to restore some of its habitat. The next species that I would like to talk about is bog turtle. This is America's smallest turtle, and it was federally listed under the Endangered Species Act as threatened. We also have been working on bog turtle habitat for decades here in New Jersey. They were once much more common and were often associated with dairy farms here in New Jersey. The cow grazing activity in wetlands created the perfect habitat for this species. So it was often associated with land, especially those swampy stream corridors that went through dairy operations back in the day. Oftentimes, when the dairy operations no longer existed or cows had been fenced out of the stream for water quality purposes, which is definitely important and something that we commonly do, those areas that they formerly grazed were starting to have woody vegetation become established in too great of quantities that the nesting habitat for bog turtle is no longer present. So we'll sometimes work with landowners to reinitiate that grazing, but really with the right number of animals for the right duration in the right location to create some of the hummocky habitat that's perfect for bog turtles for nesting. So this is a spot that has been opened a little bit, get some sunlight into it, and remove some of the woody vegetation. And you can see some of the hummocky type habitat where the turtles will lay their eggs. And here's another example of that type of work. Here's a picture to show that it is quite a small species, and New Jersey is one of its strongholds. So we want to make sure that wherever we can restore habitat for this rare species. So those were some of the two initial species that we worked with through the Working Lands for Wildlife initiative. But over the years, other species have been added to the suite of species protected through or worked on through this initiative. And states were given the ability to ask for a particular species or habitat to be added to the list. And New Jersey, like I said before, we're a small state, but we now have 4 species that we focus on through this initiative. The next one that I'd like to talk about for a little bit is northern bobwhite. So northern bobwhite, known as the Prince of Game Birds, is a familiar face for many rural landscapes throughout the country. What's interesting about the habitat for bobwhite quail in New Jersey is that it's really hard to find a bobwhite quail in New Jersey currently. Most of our landowners remember the day when they could hear coveys or would hunt them back in decades ago. But we're really at the northernmost reach for its range, and we have a little bit of different habitat that is unique to other parts of its range down in the south. So our bobwhite quail initiative in New Jersey was focused on restoring pine barrens savanna habitat. And knowing that our forests in the pine barrens have been undermanaged for many years, and they're overstocked, we wanted to really go in and restore some of the habitat that was there at one time by doing thinning projects and restoring some early successional habitat, and then in bringing back some management like prescribed burning, and create some of those early successional habitats that would have created the mosaic of pine forest and pine savanna that would have occurred in New Jersey at one time and would have been good habitat for bobwhite quail. And of course, other ground nesting bird species will benefit from this work as well. And there's all the secondary benefits that go along with doing this work, like fire suppression, and the ability to protect some of our vulnerable communities from catastrophic fire by implementing prescribed burning and bringing the forest down to a healthy stand level. The next species that was brought into the mix for the Working Lands for Wildlife is the American black duck. And we have historically done many wetland restoration projects through that wetland reserve easement program that I mentioned earlier. And this is the perfect habitat for black duck. Ben Lange with our partner organization, Ducks Unlimited, will spend a whole evening going through the various components of black duck habitat needs. So I just wanted to give a quick overview of the type of work that we do to restore wetlands for black duck and other waterfowl and other wading birds or shorebirds that also use it. So this is a picture of a site that was that wet corner of a crop field that was not as productive as a farmer would have liked. It was wet in the spring, couldn't get in there early enough with for seeding purposes, was not giving high yields because maybe it was still wet into the fall. And it's not a site where the landowner would take their entire acreage out of production, but perhaps just that wet corner, the least productive area. And we can restore water wetlands for waterfowl here by undoing some of the agricultural impacts. If there was tile drainage, we could disrupt that. If there are a series of ditches, we can reconfigure that to keep the water on site longer, and really focusing on the idea of having water on the site during the migratory season, so during the spring and the fall. But it may dry up in the summer, and that's okay. And really just getting that hydrology established, creating some macro topography in that area is great for all sorts of waterfowl, nesting birds, shorebirds, wading birds. We try to diversify it to cover a lot of different species, as well as our reptiles and amphibians that will be breeding in here. And this work takes place a lot in our southern counties, but also a little bit. This is a picture of Pine Barrens where we do this type of restoration as well. And then there's some areas in North Jersey that would be great habitat for black duck too. So I mentioned earlier that we would be focusing on some pollinator habitat, and Olivia Matisse with the Xerces Society will be presenting on pollinator habitat. And although it's not one of our Working Lands for Wildlife Initiative focal species, there is a monarch initiative nationally. We are not within one of the states highlighted specifically for that, but so many of our projects will also be beneficial to pollinator species. And we can do that by targeting their needs through our plantings for herbaceous, grass habitat, um, the wildflowers, but even in planting trees and shrubs for other parts of their life cycle, and even some of the forestry work, we can benefit pollinator species. And we'll be hearing much more of that during Olivia's presentation. So there's one other thing that I wanted to touch on today, and that's our partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. You saw earlier in the slides that the Working Lands for Wildlife initiative started as a partnership between NRCS and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And here in New Jersey, long before Working Lands for Wildlife was established, we have been working hand in hand with our partners at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on habitat restoration projects throughout New Jersey. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has a program called the Partners for Fish and Wildlife, PFW, and that's a voluntary on-the-ground habitat improvement projects on private lands for the benefit of federal trust species. And the goal of the Partners program is to promote and implement habitat improvement projects that benefit those federal trust species. And when Mark speaks during his Wednesday webinar, he'll go through all those different federal trust species and which ones are really focused on here in New Jersey. The Partners program also provides conservation leadership and promotes partnerships. We're all working together. And they want to encourage public understanding and participation. And they often work with the USDA to implement our programs and our conservation practices. It's very common that a landowner will have both a USDA Farm Bill program contract and a Partner for Fish and Wildlife agreement on the same ground to do various components of the same project. Because we have a lot of common ground. For instance, WRE and our bog turtle work, that's a federal trust species, and also through Working Lands on American black duck habitat. And really the goal there is to build those relationships and help administer our programs and help prevent the listing of some of these species by taking on management activities that will benefit their species. And what's the difference between USDA Farm Bill programs and what the New Jersey Field Office of the Fish and Wildlife Service can offer through the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program? They are an awesome resource for materials. They have native trees, native seed, herbicide that they could give to landowners to plant, or they can actually help install those with their labor, with their manpower, with their people power. They do have some TA, technical assistance, and some FA as well, financial assistance. And their technical assistance can be used in the planning process and putting permit applications together. And they do have some funding for small purchases and cooperative agreements. The Farm Bill programs have probably a larger dollar amount that we can contribute to the project, but some of the on-the-ground work that the Fish and Wildlife Service can do with their equipment makes the facilitation of those projects go much more smoothly. They have a mini excavator, skid steer, tractor, spray equipment, an ATV, and grass drills that they can bring to a site, loan to landowners, or do the work themselves. And that's been a great resource for us to be able to offer our landowners in conjunction with the funds that we can provide to implement the practices. So where do we work, or how do landowners reach our offices to start doing some of this work with us? We have 6 field offices throughout New Jersey, and they're based on county boundaries. So we have in the north, we have an office in Mount Olive. We have an office in Frenchtown, which covers Somerset, Hunterdon, and Union counties. Our Freehold office covers Monmouth, Middlesex, and Mercer. And we have an office in Columbus, right off of 206 by the county fairgrounds. And they work with landowners in Camden, Burlington, and Ocean County. In our Woodstown Service Center, we work with our landowners from Gloucester and Salem County. And then in our farthest south office is our Vineland Service Center, which works with landowners in Atlantic, Cumberland, and Cape May County. And here's a list of those list of those field offices and where they're located again, and our website of where you can find the contact information to reach those field offices. Our specialists work statewide, so I happen to work, my desk is in our Woodstown Service Center, but I provide assistance to all 6 field offices when they have landowners that are interested in enhancing their property for wildlife habitat. And just as a reminder, here is the list of upcoming Wildlife Wednesday webinar series presentations. And there'll be, again, one specifically on black duck, one on northern bobwhite quail. We'll have a bog turtle talk, a golden winged warbler, and one on pollinator ecology. And this last slide has the website if you would like to go back and register for each of those different sessions. And also feel free to take a minute now if you would want to scan that QR code, and it'll bring you right to the Eventbrite website to register. So that concludes my presentation for this evening. We have another 20 minutes available if anybody has questions that they would like to ask. I'd be happy to talk about that. We can talk about individual species a little bit, or if you have questions about our programs, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. So feel free to come off of mute and ask some questions. And we do have some of our partner biologists that have joined us for the evening. So partner biologists, if you see any questions in the chat and could help me out by reading those, I'd appreciate it. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Betsy. Right now, I don't see any questions in the chat. So just taking a look at that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. Well, we'll leave this slide up for another few minutes. If anybody would like to, needs a minute to take a picture or get to that Eventbrite site. And otherwise, we will have all of our webinars recorded and available on YouTube for viewing at a later date. And I appreciate everyone that took the time on this evening to join us to talk about our Working Lands for Wildlife initiative.